Welcome to the Prime Property Finance Podcast with Gareth Morgan and Mark Watts. This unique podcast will dive deep into all areas of property investing finance, going behind the scenes with property professionals, investors and clients. Between us, we have 35 plus years experience in property finance. The podcast has been launched to share knowledge, mindset requirements and experiences of successful investors and professionals. We aim to simplify many of the complicated areas of finance and investing and provide valuable and easy to implement tips. Keep an eye out for our new longer episodes every Tuesday and our shorter ones every Friday. One of the challenges with following property news is that it's very easy to look at individual headlines in isolation. One day you'll read the first-time buyers are struggling to get on the property ladder. The next you'll read that housing targets are being missed. And then you'll see lenders improving their products and increasing leverage for investors. At first glance, all of these stories can feel disconnected, but when you put them together, they actually tell a much bigger story about the UK property market and where things may be heading over the next few years. So in today's episode, I want to look at 3 recent headlines and explain what they mean for property investors, landlords, homeowners, and first-time buyers. So the first story is with a headline of a third of renters could face a 35-year journey to home ownership. And this story comes from Connells, who are a massive brand. They own Skipton Building Society. They own lots of other companies, a huge brand. And they suggest that around a third of renters could face a journey of up to 35 years before getting onto the property ladder. Now, whether that exact number is 35 years or not is not necessarily an important part of the story. The real issue is what sits underneath the headline. So what is actually happening here? We've got a combination of factors all working against first-time buyers. Property prices are remaining relatively high compared to their income. Affordability stress tests still impact borrowing. Cost of living remains elevated. And perhaps most importantly, many people are trying to save for a deposit whilst paying rent. And because rents are high, incomes compared to incomes, the actual rent figure is high, which means their disposable income is low. It's very, very difficult to save for a deposit whilst you're renting. So obviously there are things that people can do outside of that, but this is why, we're basing this stories are based on a third of all renters. So they haven't got any other option like living with parents or deposits from elsewhere. Anyone who's rented a property recently knows how challenging it can be. You've got rent, bills, food, travel costs, childcare costs, and then somehow expected to save thousands of pounds towards a deposit at the same time. Yes, there are some schemes available for low deposit mortgages, which we've talked about previously, but the fact of the matter is it's difficult. So the result is that ultimately people are going to be renting for longer. And whilst that's frustrating for aspiring homeowners, it has a wider implication on the housing market. From an investor perspective, if people are renting for longer, demand for rental property remains strong. If demand is good, there's more people looking for the same properties. That means prices go up. It doesn't automatically mean that every investment property is a good investment, but it does reinforce that the importance of the private rented sector. Harder it becomes to buy, the more important the rental market becomes. Okay, so that's the first story. The second story is around housing targets by the government likely to be missed. So the second story is from Savills, who are forecasting that housing delivery is likely to fall significantly short of the government target. The government target since Labour came in, and it's been a target for quite some time amongst various parties, is to deliver 300,000 new homes per year. And Savills forecast that it's going to be around 56% of that over the coming years up to 2030 at around 167,000 properties a year. It's a huge, huge shortfall in their target. And why does this matter? Because housing is ultimately driven by the same principle, supply and demand. If demand continues to grow and supply doesn't keep up, then the pressure builds through the entire housing system. Which means that affects everyone from the start of the chain, first-time buyers. And if there's no first-time buyers, then that affects people wanting to move home and move up the chain. It affects renters, so the costs and supply availability. It affects landlords. It affects developers. It pretty much affects everyone. So why are we struggling to build enough homes? There isn't one single reason necessarily. Obviously, one of the big ones is around planning delays and the complicated nature of the planning system, which is archaic. It's not fit for purpose. It's an absolute nightmare. So that's just planning delays, and that's to do with a number of reasons with where policies don't align. One policy, you pass with one policy, but having to introduce that policy means that it impacts another policy, and then therefore you get decline and things have to go to appeal, and there's not enough staff within planning departments. There's a number of reasons. Infrastructure challenges. You've got construction cost inflation, which obviously is a huge one, and just deals don't work anymore because the cost of, in some examples I've seen, if people were given the land for free, the cost of building the project or the site or whatever it is, or converting it, they still wouldn't make a profit on it based on the end values. So it is really challenging. Obviously, we've got labour shortages. After post-Brexit, a lot of Eastern European workers left the country post-Brexit and post-COVID. So those two factors, and they haven't returned. So it's just really making it viability of sites for developers who are seen as, these get-rich-quick people or wealthy developers. It's not the case. And then financing constraints then based on those costs and those constraints makes it difficult to get finance for projects. So whilst the governments all talk around the housing crisis, what are they actually doing to deliver large numbers of new homes? They're not. And so from an investment point of view, what are the key takeaways for this? If there's supply constraints, that creates opportunity. But it's not important not to confuse, the shortage with guaranteed investment success, because they're not aligned. Deals still need to stack. You still need to be able to get the finance for them to work. And then ultimately cash flow still needs to matter. So you should be making sure that, you've got an exit option A, B, C, D, E, as many as you can. You can't solve the housing shortage without building enough homes. And therefore that puts enough constraint and pressure on the rest of the market. And then the third story then is around Shawbrook Bank enhancing its bridging proposition. They've announced that basically they've improved parts of their offering around leverage, refurbishment finance, and accessibility. So why is this important? Lender behavior tells them more about market confidence. Lenders don't generally become more competitive because they're worried about doing business. They become more competitive because they want to write more business. They're in the business of lending money. And so obviously if they're loosening the criteria, it means they want to get more money out the door, which is great for investors involved in refurbishments, auction purchases, BRR projects, and anything where you can add value, because there's more options, there's more opportunities, and there's more flexibility. However, as with all short-term finance, investors really need to be careful here. More leverage isn't always better leverage. And one of the biggest mistakes that people make is assuming because a lender will lend more money that you should take it. And that's not always the case. So it only makes sense if the deal works, because if it doesn't, then it can be dangerous. And these are the horror stories you would have heard about within bridging finance. But we've got loads and loads of successful investors who've used bridging and development finance very successfully, paid it back, and done it a number of times over and over. So how do these sort of three stories align? Well, if we start connecting the dots, story one is around people are finding it harder to buy. Story two is that we're not building enough homes. And story three is that lenders are remaining active and competitive. So what this tells us is that the fundamental drivers of the property market haven't really changed. People still need housing. We're struggling to create enough new housing, and finance remains available for the right opportunities. So what's the bigger picture then? So despite all the noise around politics, rates, inflation, and economic uncertainty, the underlying challenge remains remarkably consistent. We have supply-constrained housing market. So it's not broken, it's just constrained. And what does that mean for investors? So if you're a property investor listening to this, then the headlines shouldn't create any panic whatsoever. They should just reinforce the important principles. So things to focus on: the strong fundamentals, making sure the deals stack, cash flow, taking sensible leverage, making sure that you're using realistic assumptions in your deal stacking, and thinking for the long term. Because headlines change every week. The investors are the ones with a long-term view, stay disciplined through the different market cycles. So when you look at these three stories, put together, it's an interesting picture. The affordability for first-time buyers remains challenging. Housing supply remains constrained, which means prices stay high, and lenders continue to look for opportunities to support those in the market because they need more deals. So for me, that suggests the market is still at plenty of opportunity, but one, understanding the fundamentals is more important than ever. Don't just read a headline, look underneath it, because successful investors don't react to individual news stories. They understand the biggest trends in the market. So thanks for listening, and remember to invest with confidence, with clarity and credibility. We'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. We hope you have learned something and have some tips to take away. We'd be very grateful if you enjoyed the show. You could give us a review and share with anyone that you know that may be interested. And of course, subscribe to the show so you can get notified when a new episode is released. If you'd like us to answer any questions or go deeper on a specific topic, please drop us a message at primeproperty.finance. See you on the next episode.